Damn. And GT, the most powerful being in the known galaxy, was sitting on a cold bench, crying, and a 19-year-old human maintenance tech named Marcus Webb handed her a sandwich. That one moment changed everything for him, for her, for every species in the conclave, and none of it would have happened if Marcus had just eaten his lunch like a normal person. Today we're going to walk through one of the most extraordinary first contact stories in the Conclave archives, what actually happened the day humanity nearly lost its only seat on the Galactic Conclave, and why one kid in a grease-stained jumpsuit was the only thing standing between us and permanent exile. Who Lysara really was, why she was alone on a human station with no guard detail and a broken translator chip, and what she was so desperate to hide, and the thing that the Conclave's oldest member said when she heard what Marcus did, a single sentence, 14 words, that made every diplomat in that chamber go completely silent. We're going to get to all of it. Stay with me. Marcus Webb was, by every official metric, completely unremarkable. He was 19, he had a Class 4 maintenance certification, a bunk in the lower residential ring, and an outstanding balance of 400 credits on a protein pack subscription he kept forgetting to cancel. He'd been posted to Helix 4, a joint human-alien transit hub orbiting the moon Kindra, because his supervisor on Earth said, and I'm quoting the actual transfer paperwork here, Webb has a talent for fixing things that probably shouldn't still be working. That was it. That was his entire recommendation. Helix 4 in 2038 was not a glamorous posting. It was a waypoint, a place ships stopped to refuel, restock, and file paperwork before moving on to somewhere more important. The Conclave used it as neutral ground, which meant it was technically protected by interstellar treaty, which meant nobody important wanted to be stationed there, which meant the staff was about 60% junior personnel who'd either been posted there as a first assignment or sent there as a quiet punishment. Marcus was in the first category. He liked it, actually. The alien species who passed through mostly ignored him, which suited him fine. He had his tools. He had a small shelf of physical paperback books, a rarity in 2038, and he had a route he walked every shift: docking bay 3 to bay 7, checking seals, replacing worn coupling pins, logging anomalies. Quiet, methodical, simple. On the day this story begins, Marcus was 23 minutes into his lunch break, sitting in the observation nook at the end of Corridor 14G. It was his spot. Nobody else used it because the viewport looked out at a maintenance strut instead of stars. But Marcus liked it because it was quiet, and because the bench was warm from the heat exchangers behind the wall. He had a sandwich, real bread. He traded 2 shifts with a colleague who had bakery privileges, smoked protein, something that passed for mustard, pressed between 2 thick slices of actual wheat bread. He was very, very happy about this sandwich. He was approximately 1 bite in when he noticed her. Now, before we talk about who she was, I need you to understand what she looked like, because the visual description in the Conclave archive is one of the most specific things in the entire record. And there's a reason for that. Keep that in mind. She was Valhari. If you don't know the Valhari, and before this story broke publicly, most humans didn't, here's what you need to know. The Valhari are roughly humanoid 2 legs, 2 arms, bilateral symmetry. Upright posture. But the similarities end there. Skin is a deep shifting indigo, the kind that moves through shades the way bruise does, darker when they're cold or frightened, lighter when they're calm or warm. Their eyes are large, entirely gold, no visible pupil. Their hair, if you can call it that, is made of extremely fine, light refracting filaments that move slowly in response to their emotional state, the way sea anemones move in a current. When Velhari are content, those filaments drift lazily outward, catching light. When they're distressed, they pull inward, flattening against the skull. Marcus would later describe it in his official debrief as like watching someone's hair try to hide. She was young, he could tell that from the proportions, the slightly too large eyes, the way she was sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, maybe the Velhari equivalent of mid-teens. She was wearing a plain gray travel robe that was clearly a size too large for her, and she was sitting at the very far end of Marcus' bench, pressed against the viewport, staring at the maintenance strut outside. Her filaments were completely flat. She was crying, though not the way humans cry. Velhari don't produce tears. Instead, their skin develops a faint bioluminescent shimmer. In distress, a pale silver light running just under the indigo surface like heat. Lightning, she was shimmering all over. Marcus's first instinct, and he later admitted this freely, was to pretend he hadn't seen her and go eat his sandwich somewhere else. He was 19, he was shy, and he'd had exactly 0 social training in alien emotional support. His cultural sensitivity course had been 6 hours long and covered mostly table manners and gesture tabos, not what to do when you find a crying alien teenager in your lunch spot. But here's the thing about Marcus Webb, the thing his supervisor had noticed and tried to capture with that clumsy language about fixing things that shouldn't work. He had a very low tolerance for watching something hurt and doing nothing. He sat down, not next to her. He left 3 ft of space. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down on his end of the bench and looked out the viewport at the maintenance strut. About 90 seconds passed. Then Marcus Webb did something that wasn't in any cultural sensitivity manual, wasn't protocol, wasn't even especially well reasoned. He just did it the way he did most things, without overthinking. He held out half his sandwich, not toward her face, not intrusively. He just set it on the bench exactly halfway between them and then looked back out the viewport. "I don't know if you can eat this," he said. "I genuinely don't know if it's safe for you, but it seemed rude to eat in front of someone who looked sad without offering." He'd later say that was the longest silence of his life. Then a small 4-fingered hand reached out and picked up the sandwich. She didn't eat it. I need to be clear about that. The Velhari physiology is incompatible with most Earth proteins. But she held it, both hands turning it over, looking at it, and Marcus noticed that her filaments had lifted just slightly, just a fraction. That small detail is going to matter enormously. Her translator chip was broken. This was a significant problem. Velhari communicate in a layered language. Spoken sounds overlaid with a subsonic harmonic component that carries emotional and contextual nuance. Human ears can't hear the lower register. Translation chips handle the conversion. Without one, you've got a young Velhari Girl who can produce sounds humans can hear, but she's missing the entire second layer, and her vocabulary standard was limited at best. She could say in standard, broken name is Lysara, ship delayed and waiting. She communicated all four of these things in the first 2 minutes with a degree of frustrated concentration that Marcus found both endearing and heartbreaking. Marcus, for his part, had a notebook, an actual physical notebook, one of those paperbacks he kept on his shelf. He flipped to a blank page. He drew a picture of a ship, held it up, looked at her. She shook her head, pointed at the number 3, held up her fingers. 3 days. She was stuck here for 3 days. Ship delayed, no translator, no adult companion, which Marcus noticed but didn't push on, and apparently no way to contact whoever was supposed to be meeting her. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, he said, so you're stuck and you're alone and the chip is broken. She watched his mouth, then nodded. I can't fix the chip, Marcus said. That's above my sea level, but I'm pretty good at fixing other things. He tapped his maintenance badge, and I know where everything on the station is. He spent his entire lunch break, the remaining 40 minutes, sitting on that bench with Lysara. They communicated through a combination of his drawings, her gestures, and a shared willingness to be patient with confusion. By the end of it, Marcus had established the following. Lysara was 14 years old in Velhari terms, which translated to approximately 16 by human developmental standards. She was traveling alone because she'd insisted on it. She was, he gathered, trying to prove something to someone, though he couldn't determine what or to whom. She was hungry, not dangerously so, but Velhari nutritional paste was available in exactly one vendor on Helix 4, and she'd run out of currency chips because her credit case had been stolen, and she was embarrassed about all of this. Deeply, visibly embarrassed. Her skin had gone several shades darker, which Marcus correctly intuited was not a positive sign. He stood up when his break ended, gathered his notebook, then he paused. I get off shift in 6 hours, he said. He held up 6 fingers. I'll come back. We'll sort out the food thing. He almost didn't come back. He stood in the corridor afterward and thought about it seriously, about the paperwork, about whether there were protocols for this, about whether he was going to get in trouble for engaging with an unaccompanied alien minor without reporting it. Then he thought about her sitting on that bench alone for 3 days. He went back to work and he came back in 6 hours. Now here's what Marcus didn't know yet, what none of us knew for the first 18 months after this story became public, until the Velhari Cultural Attaché released the secondary archive. There was a reason Lysara had no guard detail, and it wasn't because she'd snuck away from home to be independent. It was because of who her grandmother was. Over the 3 days that Lysara was stranded on Helix 4, Marcus Webb did the following things. He sourced 2 cartridges of Velhari nutritional paste from the station's secondary supply depot. The vendor was out, but maintenance had emergency provisions for the alien staff. He signed them out on his personal account. He found a broken holographic terminal in a storage bay and spent 3 hours of his off time repairing it to functional status so that Lysara would have entertainment during the hours he was on shift. He uploaded 14 hours of Velhari cultural programming from the station's media archive. Stuff she'd actually recognize, he figured, rather than leaving her with nothing. He convinced the station's medical AI to run a compatibility check on his food just in case. The AI determined that Vilhari physiology could actually tolerate several common Earth carbohydrates without ill effect, which meant that on day 2 Marcus brought a small selection of what he could find from the commissary: crackers, dried fruit, 2 kinds of flatbread, and spent 20 minutes watching her try each one, her filaments rising and falling with each new texture she liked. The crackers, specifically the plain unsalted kind that Marcus considered almost insultingly bland. She held each cracker with both hands, examining it from multiple angles before eating it, with an expression of intense, focused curiosity that Marcus found completely charming. He started teaching her standard words, not formally, just narrating, pointing at things and saying what they were. She was, he discovered very quickly, an exceptionally fast learner. By the end of day 1, she'd added approximately 60 new words to her vocabulary. By the end of day 2, it was over 200, and she was constructing simple sentences with an almost alarming efficiency. "You fix things," she said to him on the evening of day 2, watching him repair a coupling on the corridor wall near her bench. It wasn't quite a question. "That's my job, yeah." She considered this. Why? Because they're broken. She turned this over for a moment. "You also fix." She searched for the word, gestured at herself at the space between them. Marcus looked at her. "Situations." "Situations," she repeated, trying the word shape. "Yes, you fix situations." "I try," Marcus said. "I'm better with mechanical problems, honestly." She watched him work for a while. Her filaments were drifting freely now, extended to their full length, catching the pale light of the corridor. "Marcus," she said finally, "yeah, my grandmother will want to speak with you." He laughed, just a short, tired end of shift laugh. "Sure," he said, not really processing it. "Sounds good." He went back to work on the coupling. He didn't ask any follow-up questions. This is the detail that every political analyst, every diplomatic scholar, every commentator who has since written about the Helix 4 incident focuses on. Marcus didn't ask. He didn't think it was significant because Marcus Webb didn't know who Lysara's grandmother was. None of the human staff on Helix 4 did, because when Archmatriarch Thesavine of the Vahari sovereignty, the oldest living member of the Galactic Conclave, the being who had negotiated humanity's original provisional membership in 2341, the being that 4 separate species referred to in their own languages by a phrase that translated roughly to the one who decides, when she sent her granddaughter on a solo transit journey as a coming-of-age rite, she hadn't filed the travel manifest under the family name. She'd filed it under the girl's personal name alone for privacy. And this is where the story shifts completely, because on day 3 something happened that nobody planned for, something that, if it had gone just slightly differently, would have ended humanity's place in the conclave entirely. On the morning of day 3, Station Commander Adaze Okonkwo received an encrypted priority communication from the Vilhari Sovereignty's diplomatic office. It contained 3 things: photograph of Lysara, a description of her route, and a level of political urgency that Akono later described as the most terrifying document I have ever Read, it turned out that the matriarch's granddaughter had been missing for 2 days before the sovereignty realized the transit delay had extended beyond the expected window. 2 days in which, from their perspective, a member of their ruling family was unaccounted for on a human station. The communication was not accusing anyone of anything, it was carefully, diplomatically phrased. But the implication was clear. If something had happened to Lysara on Helix 4, the consequences for humanity standing in the conclave would be significant. Akono moved fast. She pulled every crew member who might have had contact with an unaccompanied Velhari juvenile. The list was short. The station's alien visitor logs were thorough. Marcus Webb's name was at the top. He was pulled from his shift within 20 minutes, brought to Okonkwo's office, and spent the first 5 minutes of the interview not understanding why everyone was looking at him like he'd either committed a crime or performed miracle, and they weren't sure which. The girl, Okonkwo said. Lysara. You know where she is? Sure, Marcus said. She's probably on the bench in Corridor 14G. That's where she sleeps. The station gave her a bunk in the visitor quarters, but she likes it there better. I fixed the temperature regulation on that wall section 2 days ago, so it'd be warmer for her. Akono stared at him. You fixed the individually modified the station's thermal regulation for an alien child. The heating was uneven. Marcus said it wasn't that complicated. Webb, do you know who her grandmother is? She said her grandmother wanted to talk to me. I figured she meant on a call or something whenever her ship got rescheduled. There was a very long silence. Her grandmother, Okonkwo said carefully, is Arch-Matriarch Thevan. Marcus looked at her blankly, then he looked at the ceiling for a moment as his brain caught up, then he looked back at Okonkwo. Oh, he said. Yes, said Okonkwo. Another silence. Is Lysara okay? Marcus asked. That's the main thing, right? She's fine. She's been eating. She learned about 240 words of standard as of last night in her ship is supposed to dock in 4 hours. Akono opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Webb, she said, you've been informally babysitting the granddaughter of the most powerful being in the galactic conclave for 3 days, and your first question is whether she's okay. Well, yeah, Marcus said a little defensively. She's a kid who was stuck alone on a strange station. That's the main thing. It was, the diplomatic historians would later agree, exactly the right answer. Not because it was strategic, not because Marcus had calculated the political optics, but because he meant it. And because, when Okonkwo brought him to Corridor 14G, and they found Lysara sitting on her bench with the holographic terminal, crackers, and a notebook full of standard vocabulary practice, the way Lara's filaments spread to their absolute maximum extension when she saw Marcus walk in, told you everything you needed to know. Lara's ship arrived on schedule, and with it came something that was very much not on the original manifest, a second vessel, smaller, private, flying the sovereign standard of the Velhari ruling house. Arch-Matriarch Thesini had come herself. Arch-Matriarch Thesini was 312 years old. In the Velhari long life physiology, this placed her in what they called the Elder Prime period, the stage at which their indigo skin had shifted to a deep settled violet that no Longer changed with emotion because the Velhari believed emotion had been fully integrated with thought and could no longer be distinguished from it. Her filaments were long beyond what Marcus had seen in Lysara, and instead of the fine refracting filaments of youth, they were dense and luminous, each one softly glowing with its own pale light, so that the Archmatriarch arrived in Helix 4's docking bay, looking to human eyes like someone had wrapped a very ancient, very dignified person in a halo. She was accompanied by a security detail of 12 diplomatic aides, 2 translators, and a protocol officer who looked like he was sincerely reconsidering his career choices. Station Commander Okonkwo met them at the bay in her full dress uniform. She had also discreetly, quickly, with enormous professionalism, made sure that Marcus Webb was standing beside her, also in his dress uniform, which turned out to be a slightly too large jacket that he'd borrowed from the supply room because he didn't own one. The Savin walked down the docking ramp. She was tall, perhaps 2 m, and she moved with the complete absolute stillness of someone who has never been in a hurry in 3 centuries and saw no reason to start now. She walked directly to Lysara, who was standing slightly behind Marcus, and said something in Velhari that the translators rendered as an extremely formal expression of relief. Lysara answered. A long exchange followed, which the translators were quietly rendering into earpieces for Okonkwo, but not notably for Marcus. Then Thay turned to Marcus Webb. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked the way 3 centuries of living teaches you to look, seeing more in a face than most people learn to see in a lifetime. Marcus, to his credit, did not visibly panic. He later said the thing that kept him calm was that she reminded him of his grandmother. Same combination of total authority and specific personal attention. The kind that makes you feel you should stand up straight, but also that you're being genuinely seen. You are Marcus Webb, the Archmatriarch, said through the translator. Her standard pronunciation was, unlike Lysare's, completely fluent. She'd been speaking it for longer than humanity had been in the conclave. Yes, Archmatriarch, Marcus said, my granddaughter has told me what you did. He started. She told me, Vasini said, and there was something in her tone that stopped him mid-sentence. That you sat down beside her, that you offered half of what you had, that you said in these words which she memorized. It seemed rude to eat in front of someone who looked sad without offering. She paused. She also told me that you repaired the temperature regulation of the wall section where she slept so that she would be warmer. Another pause. And that you found her crackers. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. He was very aware that his borrowed jacket didn't fit properly. Archmatriarch, I didn't know who she was. I want to be honest about that. I didn't know she was your granddaughter. She was alone and she looked sad. And it was clear as throat my lunch spot. I know, Thessie said, that is precisely the point. And then she said the 14 words, the ones that every diplomat in the chamber went silent for, except that we're not in the chamber yet, we're still in the docking bay, and it wasn't a chamber. It was a maintenance corridor station, with flickering bay lights and the smell of fuel coolant, and Marcus Webb in a large borrowed jacket. She said, the Velhari do not give gifts to those who know they are watching, we give them to those who are kind when no one sees. Now here's where you need to understand what was actually at stake. Because Thessie didn't just say something poetic and walked back to her ship. What she did next had consequences that echoed through the conclave for the next 11 years, and Marcus Webb had no idea any of it was coming. In the weeks before the Helix 4 incident, the Galactic Conclave had been in the middle of a quiet crisis about humanity. Humanity had been a provisional member since 2341. 46 years. Provisional membership was unusual. Most species either earned full membership or got rejected within a decade. The conclave had kept humanity in a kind of extended evaluation for nearly half a century, and the political reality behind that delay was complicated. 3 factions existed, the first led primarily by the Kethrani and the Dorevil wanted humanity out. The argument was efficiency. Humans were unpredictable, emotionally volatile, and had a documented history of treating the environment of their own planet with what the Kethrani ambassador called breathtaking indifference. These weren't unfair points. Full membership required a species commitment to long-term stability, and humans had spent 2 centuries proving they were capable of extraordinary things and equally extraordinary self-destruction. In roughly equal measure, the second faction, smaller, quieter, felt that humanity showed genuine promise and deserved full membership. The Tyvari were the most vocal in this camp. They liked humans. They found human creativity and adaptability genuinely interesting rather than threatening. The third faction, the largest and most important, was the faction that Arch-Matriarch Thessavine effectively controlled. Through the sheer weight of her age, her relationships, and her reputation. Clear's throat, she was undecided. For 46 years, she had been undecided about humanity, watching, gathering data, asking questions that the conclave observers brought back from human space, and that she read with close, patient attention. The question she was trying to answer was not whether humans were intelligent. They clearly were. Not whether humans were capable. They clearly were. The question was, what do humans do when no one is watching? And then her granddaughter had gotten stranded on a human transit station with a broken translator chip and no credit. And she'd found out 6 weeks after the Helix 4 incident. Arch-Matriarch Thessavini called a full session of the Galactic Conclave. She spoke for 40 minutes, then she made a motion. The vote was 63-1. Humanity's provisional status was revoked. We became full members. The speech Thani gave to the conclave is part of the public record. The section that the human diplomatic corps said made the room go completely still went like this. The question before this body has never been whether humans are capable of civilization. Every species here has demonstrated civilization. The question has been whether humans are capable of civilization in the specific way that the long project of peace requires. Not when they are observed, not when they are rewarded, not when history is watching, but in the ordinary moments, in the corridors, in the quiet places, where nothing is at stake except one small sad creature and one person who could simply walk away. I have now seen what a human does in that corridor. He sits down, he offers half of what he has, he asks nothing in return and expects nothing in return. He repairs the heating in the wall so the room will be warmer. He finds crackers. I have been in this body for 170 years. I have watched species rise to full membership. I have watched species fail. What separates them is not intelligence. It is not technology. It is not culture. It is whether kindness in their hands is a performance or a reflex. In the hands of Marcus Webb, maintenance technician class 4, it was a reflex. That is sufficient for me. Let us vote. Marcus Webb was promoted eventually, but not immediately. The diplomatic corps tried to make him a cultural ambassador, and he politely declined. Twice he said he wasn't qualified. He asked if there was a maintenance certification program on the conclave's primary station instead. There was. He enrolled. He spent the next 7 years as part of the joint maintenance and operational team on Conclave Station Meridian, which is where the most important political negotiations in the galaxy happen. His official role was infrastructure support. His unofficial role, which developed organically and was never put in writing, was the thing the other staff started calling the corridor test. When alien delegations arrived and didn't know the human reputation yet, they'd sometimes end up interacting with Marcus in a hallway, in a commissary, wherever. And what Marcus did in those moments, without strategy, without awareness that anyone was measuring, became the thing that station staff pointed to when they had to explain humanity to a new species. Not speeches, not treaties, not technological demonstrations. Just a 19-year-old kid who sat down next to someone who was sad. Lysara did eventually get her translator chip fixed. Marcus, of course, helped with that. Before her ship departed on day 3, she went on to study xenolinguistics, a choice that the Velhari cultural attaches notes suggest was directly influenced by her 3 days of vocabulary exchange with Marcus. In 2041, she published a landmark paper on human Velhari communication patterns. She dedicated it in the acknowledgments to M. Webb, who first showed me that a sandwich could mean something, even between two species who had never met, and Marcus Webb when he was shown that dedication by a journalist who tracked him down at his workstation on Meridian. Station clears throat, read it once, folded the tablet and said, I still don't know why she liked the plain crackers. The salted ones were right there. There's a version of this story where Marcus knew, where he recognized Lysara, calculated the diplomatic opportunity, and acted accordingly. That version is tidier. It makes more sense as a political narrative. But that version didn't happen. What happened was a kid with a sandwich and a notebook and an extremely low tolerance for watching something hurt and doing nothing. The Galactic Conclave has 79 member species as of this year. Most of them have dramatic first contact stories, fleet engagements, diplomatic crises, moments of high stakes and high theater. Humanity's decisive moment, the one that tipped the vote, was a bench in a transit corridor and half a sandwich that she didn't even eat. The Velhari have a word, I've seen it translated a dozen different ways, but the translation I like best is this: the weight of small things. The idea that the small actions are not small, that the corridor is not less important than the chamber, that the kid who fixes the heating in the wall matters as much as the diplomat who signs the treaty. Marcus Webb knew that. Before he had a word for it, he was, according to every official record, completely unremarkable. He changed everything anyway. If you want more stories about humanity's place in the galaxy and the moments large and small that built it, there's a story from 3 years later about the first Cathani ambassador who reversed her position on humanity. The reason she changed her mind involves a power outage, a human child in a very cold docking bay, totally unrelated to this story, but you're going to want to hear it.